Welcome to Shaped by Faith, where we shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. I am so excited about my guest today. Tara Johnson is a writer, singer, speaker, and she's a passionate lover of stories. Tara uses fiction and nonfiction, song, and laughter to share her testimony of how God led her into freedom after spending many years living shackled to the expectation of others. And Tara, I think a lot of people out there can relate to that, people pleasing. She lives in Central Arkansas with her husband and children, and you can find her at tarajohnson.com, and Tara is T-A-R-A. And welcome to Shaped by Faith, Tara.
Thank you so much for having me. I am just overjoyed to be with you today.
Well, I am just overjoyed to be with you, and I'm so thankful the way God connected us. And you write from your heart and you write for the Lord, and I love that. So let's talk a little bit about your background, and wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind sharing how God led you into freedom and how this has changed you and your destiny.
Absolutely. You know, as you said, I was a preacher's kid. I grew up as a preacher's kid, and it was one of those things that I actually loved. I've talked to many PKs, as we call ourselves, who didn't like that accountability. And growing up in the church as I didn't mind it so much. But one thing I did notice growing up is that we as Christians tend to pick each other apart sometimes. And I somehow got it in my mind, and I'm not sure why, because my parents were awesome. They never put pressure on me to try to be something other than who I was. But I somehow got it in my mind that God was happy when the church was happy. And in my mind, the church was happy when I put on this good little Christian girl persona, put on the superhero cape, and smiled and kept everybody around me smiling. So if there was a class that needed to be taught, I would volunteer to teach it. If somebody needed to take the teenagers to church camp, I would do it. If we needed a VBS director, I volunteered to do it. No matter what the situation was, I was Miss Christian, and I did it with this big smile. But what people didn't realize is that as I got older and I began to take on more and more responsibility, I had a lot of resentment and anger on the inside. And, people pleasing is a moving target. It can't be done. You can't please everybody. And everything kind of came to a head in about around 2002. The problem was, too, when I got married, my husband got a job several hours away from where my parents lived. So we moved and we joined a new church. So I had a whole new group of people I had to impress, with what an awesome Christian I was. And so it started all over and actually got worse. And in 2002, I just remember one night I just couldn't do it anymore. I thought, I can't live this way. God, this is not the victorious life that you promised. I remember telling him that, and I just felt like I was drowning. And I didn't care if God took me out or if he took everybody else out around me, but I just wanted to escape, Right. And I went to my doctor the next day. I'd had this emotional breakdown, and he said, "Well, Tara, you're depressed." And I told him, "Well, I'm a good Christian, and good Christians don't get depressed." And I thought later what a ridiculous statement that was, because if Christians never got depressed, we wouldn't have most of the Psalms,
That's
honestly.
Right.
And he said, "Well, you're doing so many good things, but you're doing them for the wrong reasons. You're doing them to make people happy." And he said, "People didn't die for you. God did. So what are you doing?" And God used that moment and that revelation to wake me up. And over the course of the next year, I read the book Boundaries, and I got on some medication to help rebuild the serotonin in my brain because I had shot it completely, And but then I started studying the Bible in a new way. I thought, I'm not just going to study the teachings of Jesus, but how did he interact with people? Was he always nice? Did he always do what people wanted? How did he deal with relationships in his life? And I was shocked to realize that Jesus is not a people pleaser.
No,
He is a God pleaser. And if I really want to be like Jesus in every way, shape, and form in my life, I have to lay down this need to please people, And and that is what God did. He led me out of this life of living for applause. And really what it is, it's a need for unconditional love.
Right.
And that's what so many of us really are craving. We want approval. We want love. And so we look for it in a million different things. Some people use alcohol or relationships or shopping or entertainment or busyness. But we're all trying to fill that emptiness some way. And people pleasing is no different. That is how God transformed my life. Doing that. And I'm very careful about how, what I say yes to now. And I check my motivations often, say, okay, why am I really doing this?
That's good. So you asked God for help. You got help. You started to read the Bible, in a new way. I think all those things are key. For people listening right now, always go to God first. What's going on, Lord? That kind of lifestyle is a hard lifestyle to keep up. You can't please everyone. We want people to like us, I think, just humanly, we want people to like us, but you got to understand not everyone's going to like us, regardless. As you were growing up, you faced a challenge as a child. So you had a seizure disorder. So do you want to talk about that?
Yes. When I was about 8 years old, I remember vaguely the incident. I was sitting in the living room playing with something in one of the chairs. I don't know if it was a Barbie doll or a book or something. I just remember I had something in my lap and I was playing with it. And all of a sudden, I looked up and it was like there was a space of time that had disappeared. And that's the only way I know how to describe it, other than it's like a chunk of my memory or time was just gone. It was eclipsed. And I remember my mother looking at me in this very strange way, kind of very alarmed. Mm-hmm. And she said, Tara, what was that? I said, what are you talking about? She said, you just completely spaced out. You stared at the wall for no reason for quite a while. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And it began to happen more and more. And she was very wise and smart, and she worked in the medical field. And not too long before that, I had a really, really high fever with an illness, and I had developed seizures, they believe, from that. And I dealt with that completely through my childhood and adolescence. And it was always so bizarre to me. And I dealt with, at times, shame with that because, there's nothing like standing in the hallway at middle school and lining up to go outside or to transition with classes. And all of a sudden, you come out of this black void and you look down and people are snickering and pointing at you and you have wet your pants and you have no idea why, So there's a lot of embarrassment with that. And, apparently I had what they call petit mal or sometimes even Jackson seizures where my face would twitch or I would just stare out into space, and things like that. But it actually helped me a lot looking back. For several reasons. Whenever there's issues, I have to go to the doctor for different things. I'm able to roll with it. Medical tests don't bother me. Having my blood drawn doesn't bother me because I was like a pincushion when I was little. Anything like that, I'm just like, okay, bring it on. God's got this. Because when you deal with a lot of that when you're younger, you just learn to take it in stride, right. Become very adaptable and resilient and tough. Just out of necessity. You just learn to roll with it. And it gave me a lot of compassion for other kids who are dealing with tough stuff in a similar way.
When we go through things like that, it does prepare us. God was definitely preparing you to walk through some different places. And I also think it's for that compassion aspect, so that you would have that compassion towards other people. We need to take a real quick break here, Tara, okay? So when we come back, we're going to hear more from Tara Johnson. So everyone stay tuned for more Shaped by Faith coming up. Welcome back to Shaped by Faith, where we shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. My guest today is Tara Johnson. She is a writer, singer, speaker, and she is a passionate lover of stories. Tara, I loved the first segment, finding out about you and, what it was like for you as a child. And you did go through a little bit of challenge there. You were talking about that seizure disorder that you had. Let's now talk about encouraging people. You say you encourage people to write and live from their scars. So how have you written from your own personal scars?
Well, there's something we as people, whenever we, for example, when my son, one day, he fell when he was a little bitty guy on the driveway and skinned up his hand. What's the first thing we do whenever we have a wound? We try to hide it, right? It's the first thing he did was cover it up. That's normal for us to hide it. However, I couldn't give his hand the attention it needed until I saw how bad the damage was. But he wasn't willing to show it to me till I promised him, I'm not going to hurt you. Everything's going to be okay. Can't clean it, buddy. We are people that tend to hide our wounds. We don't want anyone to see those dark shadowed places. But God can't really heal it until we're willing to let him see it. And there's great power in vulnerability. If you really think about it, life is story. It's about the stories that God tells us. Jesus even used parables. We're supposed to learn from the past. He tells us beautiful truth and story through his word. It's his love letter to us. But sometimes it's about the stories we tell ourselves. And sometimes those stories aren't even true. And, I fell for the lie that approval equals love. And you heard about that in the first segment. That was not a true story. So, our lives are made up of all these different kinds of stories. And we have, these wounds that if we don't let them be exposed to God's light, they will continue to hurt us. So, my big wound was this need for unconditional love. The problem was I told myself a story. I said, well, I will look to people to fill that need. Well, that didn't work so well. And it wasn't until I was willing to let God shine his light on it and heal me that I could find true freedom, So what I love about writing, and encouraging other people, whether they're writing or just reading a book or whatever artistic endeavor that they're doing, is to be real, be vulnerable, be authentic, because that is where, God's going to do some powerful stuff with your journey. That's where the greatest stuff happens.
That is so good. And it's so true, because when you're vulnerable before people, you're also helping them. I'm sure that you have had your readers tell you that it helped them in their own personal journey, their own personal life or relationship with God by hearing you write from your scars.
Absolutely. And we tend to want to help people. I don't know of anyone that says, I never want to help anybody. Most people aren't, or at least they're not going to say that outright. But the truth is we can't lead people where we haven't gone.
You're right.
And it takes a lot of courage to do that. I heard somebody not long ago, I thought this quote was so brilliant. They said, all of us want to be humble. None of us want to go through what it takes to get there, though. And it's kind of kind of the same thing. But what I love about this idea of wounds is that so for instance, if I was never willing to, my first book was about a girl with epilepsy. Write what you know. Sometimes you can write what you don't know, and it works out just as well. But it was my first book, so I thought, I'll write what I know. It was about a girl with epilepsy. I've had so many people send me emails and say, I suffered with epilepsy, and I was never able to really voice the shame that I had with it. And I've never really expressed to anybody how much shame I had with it. But you kind of gave me courage to tell other people about it. And it's not about glorifying the wound or any issue that we've had, but it's about pointing people towards the healer of it. And that is Jesus. And that's really what it's about. It's about pointing people towards Christ. through the process. There's this great parable that I love, and it's about naked truth and story. And it goes that naked truth walked through a village, and nobody wanted to see her because, of course, she was naked. She was offensive to them. So they would slam the door, bar up the windows whenever she would come. And she sat down and cried because nobody would invite her in, and she was alone. Well, Story walked by and saw her crying and said, "What's wrong?" She said, "No one wants to hear what I have to say or see me." Story said, "Come with me." And she took naked truth and wrapped her in one of Story's own beautiful garments. She said, "Now go out and try to visit people again." And when naked truth was wrapped in one of Story's beautiful robes, they opened up the door to her. And they listened and they responded. And that's really what some of these stories are that I enjoy writing. I know friends of mine write, and really what great art is truth wrapped in story. You know, God's word wrapped in story. It's giving people. That's what the parables were that Jesus told. It was God's truth wrapped in a more gentle way that people could grasp and understand.
That is so good. What genre do you focus on, and why?
My favorite is historical romance. That is kind of what I'm known for at the moment. I've written 3 Civil War historical romances with Tyndale House Publishers. However, I've just been contracted to write some cozy mysteries with Annie. So that's really fun, and I'm having fun with that. And I get to play around with some humor, which I love to do because I do love comedy. But I if it's a good story, if it makes people think, if it brings light and restoration and healing, it's a joy.
Do you stay on a certain routine when you're writing? And if you do, what does this look like?
Well, I get up in the morning, take my kids to school. I always start off then after that with Bible study time because everything seems off in my day if I don't have time with God. And then I sit down, I do a little social media updates, whatever I have to do like on that for the day. It takes like half an hour maybe. And then I just start writing and I pray through all of that because it's really about writing with God. And that's something I really credit Alan Arnold with. If people have not heard of Alan Arnold, you need to look him up. And especially his book, The Story of With, was life-changing for me, the way I look at the creative process and creating with God. It's not about doing things for him. It's about doing things with him because he really wants He is our Father. We are his kids, and he really wants that experience of creating with us.
That is so good.
I love that process. You know, I've heard other writers. I'm not a big fan of word counts. I've heard other writers say, I've got in so many words today. And I heard Alan one time say, isn't that kind of like saying that I went on vacation and I got in 2,000 steps? It's not, it's not really, that doesn't really describe the vacation or something new that you experienced or something transformational that happened on the vacation. He said, that doesn't get to the heart of it. So, but what did you learn today while you were writing? That's really what it should, be more about. So I really like and connect to that approach.
That's great. Okay. We know you weave your own personal stories, which is amazing. And God leads you to do that when you write. What about other people's stories and people you know? Do you weave their stories into your books?
Only if I get their permission. So every now and then somebody will inspire something. I'll say, can I use that? And, that yes or no, whatever. But otherwise, especially the Civil War stories, I have based some of those off of real life people. Like in Where Dandelions Bloom, that was based off of a real woman named Sarah Emma Edmondson. And people like that. My newest one, All Through the Night, was the character of Cadence was loosely based on a real woman named Elida B. Rumsey. So if I do that, I try to make sure that it's common knowledge and that I give credit in the author's notes for any inspiration that was taken.
Okay, we're going to take another quick break. We will be back with more Shaped by Faith. Everyone stay tuned. Welcome back to Shaped by Faith, where we shape our bodies and hearts for God's purposes. Tara, I have really enjoyed getting to know you as a writer, and we really haven't mentioned your singing, but I know you enjoy singing, and I know you enjoy going out and speaking. Where do you speak?
Pretty much anyone who will put up with me. I go to ladies groups, churches, prisons. I love prison ministry. It's one of my favorite places to go. Just anyone who is needing some encouragement. That's where I go. The door is open.
Okay. So you heard that, Tara will go anywhere. So, yeah, we're going to tell you how to connect with her. What do you want your readers to take away from your stories? What kind of spiritual message, or what do you want them to learn?
It varies from book to book, but I've got this technique with every story. I kind of address a lie that most of us have fallen for, and some of us more than others, like on Engraved in the Heart. Keziah believes the lie, broken means I'm worthless, and she has to find out that just because I struggle with something doesn't mean that I'm worthless. She's a masterpiece in God's eyes. In the second book, Where Dandelions Bloom, Cassie's been abused by her father. And so she thinks in order to have this happy life, I have to do things on my own. She will not give up control. And she has a very hard time with forgiveness. So that's important. And all through the night, Cassie struggles with people pleasing. What a shock, she has to learn approval does not equal love. So with every story, it's a little different, but it's all about this lie that says I'm not good enough, or I can't trust God, or whatever the lie is. The truth is, God can meet more than enough of all of our needs if we're willing to just place our trust in His hands and be willing to surrender completely.
Amen.
There's freedom. There's freedom found in Him.
There really is.
That's what I love. Every time I write a new story, I learn something new about Him, and that's one of the most joyful things about the whole process.
Isn't that neat how each day we can learn something new? I mean, God kind of highlights something as we open up our hearts, and that word you used, surrender, is a big deal. And that other word you used was forgiveness. And then you use trust. I mean, they're all big deals, and God can help us with all of those things. I love the messages in your books because you address those things that so many people are dealing with, and they need freedom from those things. So thank you for being obedient to the Lord and writing what He has inspired you to write. What are you currently working on?
I am finishing up a story based on the life of Dr. Mary Walker. She was the only woman to ever receive the Medal of Honor. She was a female surgeon for the Union Army. And in addition to doing that, I'm working on a cozy mystery that I mentioned for Annie's called Every Trick in the Book. It's set in Nantucket, and it's actually going to be really fun. We've got some very quirky characters that are going to try to solve a mystery. And one thread that I really love is a son-in-law that's being sued by his mother-in-law because he's using jokes about her in his stand-up act, and she's suing for defamation of character. So that's going to be fun.
Tara, where can people find your books, and where can we find you?
You can find my books at any major retailer, and including online, Amazon, ChristianBook.com, Books A Million, Barnes and Noble. But the easiest way to get a hold of me is through my website, and that's www.tarajohnsonstories.com.
Okay, Tara, thank you so much for being my guest today. You are amazing.
Thank you, Theresa. You're a delight.
Well, God is doing amazing things in your life, and everyone connect with Tara. And thank you for listening to Shaped by Faith. I'm Theresa Rowe. Everyone have a blessed day. Bye.